Hello, O'Laughlin colleagues. Today we're going to review FERPA, and I realize this is another acronym, but it is extremely important that we are aware of the stipulations regarding FERPA. FERPA stands for Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. Alright, so why is this important for us to add this to our lingo? It is the job of every school employee to learn, understand, and comply with FERPA. FERPA applies to any school that receives federal funding from programs administered by the U.S. Department of Education. That would be us. All right, so FERPA through the ages. FERPA was implemented long ago in 1974, and it is one of the oldest privacy laws that is still currently used. There have been many changes that have occurred since the Patriot Act and the No Child Left Behind Act, and also with technology and how much it's rapidly changed and advanced. FERPA has continued to have amendments and stretches as that has happened. So, with FERPA, it gives parents the rights, many rights, and so I'm going to talk through those rights that are included within FERPA. Parents have the right to inspect and receive a copy of student records. They also can deny access to others, specifically those outside of the school system, with some exceptions. We'll talk about those later. Parents also have the right to correct errors that they might see within student records, including a hearing that would go along with that. They can opt out of military recruitment as well as the disclosure of students' directory information, which we will talk about in just a minute. And they can also go through the complaint process handled by the U.S. Department of Education. Alright, so we just mentioned education records, so let's talk about what that includes. So, FERPA basically says that it's anything directly related to a student that the school, the educational agency or institution has. Also, because technology is so advanced, now a lot of the apps or the websites that we are utilizing is acting in place of our school. So we'll talk about that in a moment as well. So anything directly related to the student that is maintained by an educational agency or institution. So that would include student grades, progress reports, test results, grade point averages, health records, disciplinary records, and many more. Those are just to name a few. Now, parents have the right to those, or I guess have the power over those educational records, and we are not allowed to share those. However, the directory information is acceptable to disclose information on. So FERPA prevents the disclosure of information from a student's educational record, but doesn't prevent disclosure of directory information. Directory information includes the names of the students and parents, the addresses, phone numbers, emails, days of attendance, birthplace, grade levels, participation in activities or sports, as well as degrees, honors, awards that those students have received. So that information we are allowed to share unless the parent would opt out of that, and that's usually done before school starts, usually at enrollment. There's a waiver that is signed for parents to opt out of the sharing of directory information if they so choose to. One of the big things that our resources talked about is these school records or the documents that the school is keeping. How do we get rid of those or destruct those so that others cannot access those? Data destruction is the process of removing information in a way that renders it unreadable if it is a paper document or irretrievable for digital records. Organizations should make risk-based decisions on which method is most appropriate based on the data type, risk of disclosure, and the impact of that data were to be disclosed without authorization. Another thing that our resources talked a lot about is surveillance. Many schools have relied on surveillance cameras or footage for protection of our students and our property. Images of students captured on surveillance recordings qualify as education records when it is directly related to that student. So a recording will not be considered directly related to a student if a student is in the background, when a student's image is simply incidental to the activity depicted in the recording, or when a student is shown participating in school activities open to the public and the recording does not necessarily focus on that specific student. There were a couple common mistakes that I can see very easy for teachers to overlook that I thought I should mention along with these slides. In post-secondary schools, you see the trend of a lot of active parents, or also known as helicopter parents, if you will. It is important to note that once students turn 18 or are enrolled in post-secondary education, the parents no longer have the right to that information unless the parents have claimed those students as their dependents on taxes. Another interesting point that I wanted to make that can be a common mistake is if an educator were to witness a fight, per se, firsthand, that they can share that information about what they witnessed. However, if that educator were to read about the incident, or a building leader were to read about that incident from an incident report, then technically it had become a school record at that point if it was documented and a person had read that documented information. It is not legal to share that information with others because at that point it had become a student or school record. All right, so as I said earlier, technology has just rapidly changed the way FERPA how to protect their information. So technology has made it much more difficult to keep student records protected. Advocates are calling for FERPA to be more strengthened and more responsive to the cyber threats of today, including ransomware and data theft. School leaders ensure that their third-party vendors have appropriate safeguards in place and make sure contracts hold them liable if something does go wrong. I know that many school districts have been looking for those free vendors that are so appealing because the word free, it's so enticing. However, it is extremely important to make sure they know the safeguards that are in place with those third-party vendors. Now, there are some exceptions that we're going to talk about. Off-duty police officers and SROs who qualify as school officials may only use personal identifiable off-duty police officers and SROs who qualify as school officials may only use personally identifiable information from educational records for the purposes for which the disclosure was made. So, for example, to promote school safety and the physical security of the students. In the event of an epidemic disease outbreak or a campus shooting, a school could legally share students' educational records with designated personnel and law enforcement officers. FERPA makes an exception to its restrictions on data sharing should knowledge of such information be necessary to protect the health or the safety of the students or other persons in connection with an emergency. Another important part that I read within our resources was about immigration and customs enforcement. All children are entitled to a public education with or without proof of citizenship. ICE does not have the right to make inquiry of or seek access to undocumented student records. So the access to student records should only be allowed if the requesting agency has a valid court order or subpoena in compliance with FERPA or immigration laws or regulations. I also have included the references that you can refer to if you need any support or if you have any questions about FERPA. I thank you for listening to this presentation.